Welcome. I'm here today with Eric Schön, who has crossed our path in these very emergent ways in which we're doing things, and we're going to explore more deeply into how systemic leadership works, how we can grow into the type of person that can handle not only the complexity, but can bring clarity to the space while staying in relation, while staying open, while staying loving, because all of us need to do this together. So, Eric, I'd like to start with a question that might traditionally belong at the end of an interview. What is the question that you'd wish people would ask you more often?
That's a good one. That reminds me of the question I kind of ask in these kind of sessions, like what did what did I forget to ask? But what's the kind of question I would like to have that I don't get so often? Well, I think this is very much here and now. I mean, leadership, change, strategy, we're in the middle of things and the world is moving at a breathtaking speed. But sometimes we forget about the history and the path dependence and where we come from as human beings and that the world has seen these things before and sometimes we're so eager to jump into the here and now and what do we do next and well, we to pause and reflect. So maybe the question around what what can we really learn from the past and why is that still relevant? I think that's a question that I like to have and sometimes I get it, but sometimes I don't.
Uh, yeah, so that there's a very interesting arc with, Sun Tzu, the people you picked for your books. The one that I still always have in my mind from Sun Tzu is about burning bridges. That sometimes
Hmm.
it just makes a lot of sense to announce we're going to do this, like the boat
Hmm.
in Paris, and then you kind of, have to figure it out. But what what drew you to these authors in particular, and how would you bend this back to the reality of today? I mean, warfare obviously has always been complex and fast moving, but compared to the rate of change that we're experiencing right now, I would have said it was kind of, you know, clean
Yeah,
or plannable.
yeah, totally. Going back 2,500 years to what is now called China. It wasn't China even. They were forming the empire at the time. So it was a time of great change. I mean, we think, pandemic, war, social upheaval. I think it was 10x or 100x worse at that time because they had a number of pandemics. They had a number of huge wars, civil wars. I mean, well, in the sense that it wasn't really China, it was forming the empire. And there were a number of technical revolutions and social revolutions during that time. So, and that was going on for several hundred years. So I would say it's like, it's not only 10x, it's 100x of change. And of course, that impacted what kind of leadership you needed, what kind of war strategies you needed. But to me, strategy and war, it's really about conflict.
Yeah.
It's a conflict and talk about the art of war or the art of strategy or the art of conflict. To me, they're very, very similar. But in one case you have physical hostilities, whereas in other you have conflict between people or organizations. But sometimes it's about winning the hearts and minds of people in the sense of succeeding together. And what kind of strategy would you use for that? So again, going back to those turbulent times 2,500 years ago or more, there are patterns, of course, that we can learn from because those were really turbulent times, and we're still human beings. We haven't changed that much over the past 3,000 years. So there are patterns we can learn from and be inspired by, and some anti-patterns, of course, as well.
So what are your personal top three?
Or change, or leadership, or strategy, or one from each.
I think let's go with one from each, but the for me it's so hard to keep them apart. Change,
Mm,
leadership,
mm,
strategy.
mm. Now, I think a few patterns reoccur, of course, and I think this talk about purpose. Um, Back in the day, in what is now called China, they talked about Tao, the way. But to me, it's purpose. I mean, what's our purpose? What's our mission? What are we going to do together? Co-creating that purpose, that gives enormous energy, enormous potential. So I think that's one key thing. Um, and the Chinese character for purpose, I mean, we all know that it's can be interpreted as the way, but it could also be interpreted as the the sides of a canal. So it sort of takes something flowing and directs it in a certain direction. So many of those Chinese concepts are very concrete when you start to study the etymology of the characters. So how do we guide water so that it can, irrigate our rice field, for instance? How can we direct the water so it can give us the water we need for living in our village? So I think that image is pretty beautiful, and yeah, purpose is something reoccurring when it comes to change, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to strategy. So that's one. Number two, I think something like integrity. And integrity, again, it's a very big word, very abstract. It means a lot to different people. But if you go back again to China 2, 3 thousand years ago or more, it's very concrete. It's walking straight, following your heart and mind. Walking straight, following your heart and mind. And heart and mind is not separate. They are sort of the same, because one without the other is sort of incomplete. You need to have a heart and you need to have a mind, and they're interconnected, and that will guide you as an individual. Of course, you should be open and aware and trusting, and listen to your family or your people in your village and so on and so forth. But that kind of integrity is also very fundamental. So I think those are my top two. And what would be number three? Hmm. What would be number three? Now, but as something around um, flexibility, I think that's important, because if we accept that times are turbulent and you have co-created a purpose and you have your integrity walking straight, following your heart and mind, but you can still be flexible on exactly what details you're going to do in order to fulfill your purpose, your co-created purpose, and still keeping your integrity. But that flexibility is super important. And there are some beautiful images around, um, let's say, grass being able to, fold when the wind blows. Whereas if you have an old and almost dying tree, it will fall because it's not as flexible as the grass on the ground. So purpose, integrity, and flexibility. There you have my top three.
I'm wondering how those change over the developmental arc, the personal developmental arc, because what I realized listening to you, the reason why those three areas kind of seem one the same to me is because I've changed a lot, thankfully, over the years. And going back to purpose, it used to be this important thing, figure out your purpose, and then your life shall have a straight direction. And, it was, yes, let's be successful and popular and make money and then be enlightened, be this, be that. And none of those purposes really did it, right? And then, it kind of turned into this North Star, similar to what you described, more wholeness, more harmony, more radiance, more beauty. First for me personally, later as a business philosophy. Um, But I say the way that I operate today is purpose. Yes, there is a direction which I'm going, but it isn't even decided by me, right? There are these guidelines, and I can try and steer, to the left, to the right, but the path is very much set. And if I pay attention, then I don't bang into the guardrails. If I don't pay attention, yes, it hurts, but I still get steered back in the same direction. There is a flow where I'm supposed to be taken, and that kind of is the same as integrity to me. I either listen to that and follow it, or it hurts. And the flexibility in that is trusting that this deeper part, like the part where the signal is coming from, not the noise from my little head, if it says, okay, now you really have to go left, even though your plan was totally different, I'm like, okay, well, then I guess I go left. And it's eerily simple, and it's only taken like 2 decades to really start becoming that simple. So how do you help people through that arc? Because it gets pretty disorienting at times.
Yeah, for sure. And coming back to purpose, that can change, of course, because that's also a bit of the flexibility, and it should be. I think it's important that it's co-created, that you do it together with people that you care about, and that could be your family, or it could be your startup, or it could be your team. So I think that part is important, and that you have some kind of learning loop or feedback loop where you take in new observations, and you're ready to change your purpose. And it doesn't have to be a North Star, like an end destination. It could be a direction. Let's start go in this direction. I think that's pretty important, that it's not necessarily an end state. And that might even be not good to have an end state, because then you lose out on a lot of opportunities potentially. Whereas if you go in a direction, then as you said, you can course correct a bit, you can tune and tweak based on what you learn along the way. So that's what I'm trying to do as well, to to co-create a system, or like this self-playing piano, to have a metaphor where this happens without me having to be there. I mean, you can say that, well, regularly we should check our direction. We should do that together and see if it's still, harmonious with what we want to do together. So that's one example of how you can do that with your team, for instance. You check it every, I don't know, for some cases it could be every quarter, or in some cases it could be monthly, sometimes it could be every 6 months. It really depends on the context and the situation. But when it comes to bigger organizations, even there, you need to check your purpose and your direction. And well, depending on the size and depending on the context and the business you're operating in, this kind of cadence could be different.
Yeah. Please tell me more about the self-playing piano. I mean, that sounds very, very related to the structures that we want to get to eventually, right? Is with the help of AI, with very aligned people, how does this become a system that just grows itself naturally, creating more harmony?
Yeah, I think that's the multi-billion-dollar question, or the question for leadership, strategy, and change, of course. But if you have that, you need to have that attitude that, okay, let's try to create this self-playing piano. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you have that metaphor, that image, then you can let go of a lot of control needs that many of us have, and especially people who are in leadership positions. But if you have the sort of image of, you know, I don't need to be here. It will work without me. I can go and build the next self-playing piano. But how you build that piano, I mean, do we need like a small toy piano, or do we need a grand piano, or do we need a school piano? I mean, that really depends on the context, and that you need to figure out together with the people that you're building it with. But just getting the acceptance that, hey, we're going to build a piano, we don't need to be pianists, all of us. It's a self-playing piano we're going to build, and we can figure out what kind of music it's going to play, what are the audiences. Those things, of course, are important when you do it. So there's no recipe for it, but it's a fun thing to do, of course, to build such a self-playing piano.
So how many beautifully tuned self-playing pianos have you actually witnessed in the world? Who has built one?
Well, I've tried. Probably not ask me if how nice the tunes were, uh, and sometimes you you get the opportunity to do it together with a group of like-minded people. I'm not saying we should all be the same, but a diverse group of people. So maybe a couple, if I'm nice to myself.
So I, if you can say, what was the difference that made the difference between the ones that worked and the ones that didn't?
Well, the test, if it is really self-playing, is when you're gone. If you go away to some other, you know, part of the organization, or you go to a new organization, and if it's still there, then I think that's one sign of that you made a self-playing piano. Uh, so what made the difference? I think that it needs to take a bit of time. I mean, you cannot do it in 2 weeks. Maybe you can't even do it in 2 years. Maybe it takes longer than that. Maybe it takes, you know, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you tune and tweak it, and you retune it, and again, you want to have these regular learning loops where you can figure out, is this the tune we want to play? How can we make it even more autonomous and self-playing? When do we need to get a piano tuner in there? and and do we need to change the tune we're playing even because the world around us is changing? So there's a number of moving parts, of course, in a real piano and this in this metaphorical piano. And I think also the again coming back to the world changing means that you want to have a group of people, and if you can grow that group of people to be bigger, I
Yeah.
think that helps you because then you will get more perspectives, more ears, more eyes to both what's going on with your metaphorical piano, but also around the audience and the concert hall or the jazz joint where you have the piano. Um, that will help. And I think that's sort of my experience there.
Yeah. I think what we're skipping a little bit is how unusual it already is to want to build self-playing pianos instead of being, this is my company and I shall, be embossed in the bronze statue in the whatever. So how did you become somebody who was even interested in building self-playing pianos in the first place?
Well, it's been a journey. I know 25 years since I started this leadership path. Um, I think I was lucky because I had people who were sort of coaching me or mentoring me who had these ideas, maybe not fully formed, fully fledged, but having a manager who took 6 months parental leave, showing you that there are other things in life that are very important, for instance, which wasn't so usual back in the 90s, even in Sweden, which is quite progressive. Um, I had other managers and teachers who talked about the importance of autonomy, and trying to give direction and then trust people to figure out how to do it. So by having such a starting point in your own personal leadership journey, I think that was crucial for me because it wasn't the classic command and control. just do what I say kind of management. So it was quite open and involving um, already from the very beginning, both in terms of training classes and mentors, and some people even talking about, when I am on vacation, you know, it should just work because I shouldn't be needed to be there, if you will. So in Sweden, we take like 3, 4, 5 weeks vacation in the summer, and you know, it should work even if the boss is not there. So small things like that.
Who knows how France sustains itself in August, right?
Yeah,
Suppose.
yeah.
Okay. If um if you look at, this whole change making space, um, what do you feel where the blind spot is, both specifically around leadership, but maybe also more general, like where should we be looking? What are we not seeing?
I think we paradoxically we think that change is very hard. There's so much inertia there. People don't want to change. So that could almost be like a mental blocker. And I think that potentially goes back to the Western philosophy tradition of well, ancient Greek, right? I mean, there were philosophers there who said, well, everything is in flux, everything is changing all the time. But those philosophers didn't win. There were others who won, and they were like, everything is fixed, it's very static, we just need to find out, and then it's hard to change. If you look at Northeast Asia, it's very much, change is the natural thing. Everything is like water. Change is easy. Change is natural. Um, Goes back to like the mythical animals, the dragons of China. They are like the ultimate shapeshifters. They can be anything. They can be any human or any animal. So they are totally changeable. They can shift shapes and colors and everything, but still they have their internal integrity, if you will. But that's like goes back even longer than 2, 3 thousand years. So if you have that kind of those kind of legends,
Yeah.
that change is that's cool. The most cool animal in our legend, that's the shapeshifter, the dragon. Then people are more inclined to change. But I think in general, we as human beings, we can handle a lot of things. We have handled a lot of things as individuals in our own personal lives. It could be, loss of things, or people dear to us. We could, move to another country or another continent. I mean, we're amazingly resilient if you think about it. We can change, right? We can. And sometimes I think if we can just remove some of the boundaries and constraints that we put to ourselves and organizations tend to put on us, uh, it's not that hard, and maybe we can have a few more legendary animals also in the sort of Western tradition that are very much change and shape shifters.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. I mean, our informal slogan for the longest time was making the impossible possible, right? And then it was how do we make it easy, scalable, repeatable? Now
Mm.
we're trying to make it inevitable. But it
Mhm.
also was that shift, right? When I said, hey, I'm gonna build villages. I had no idea how. Never touched
Mm.
real estate, never done anything like that. But I do want to go back because I think there's an interesting, even deeper layer there. Um, why do you think the Pantarei people did not win?
That's a good question. And it's a bit paradoxical again, because for some reason, I'm not sure if they wrote it down or they didn't, and it was lost. I mean, maybe it was a coincidence that the ones who won, I'm talking about Plato and Aristotle, I mean, they wrote things down, and it was sort of transferred onwards, whereas the Pantarai people, well, nothing is well, there's only fragments left, sort of. So either it was purged or it was just an unlucky accident. I don't really know, but it's interesting that both things existed also in the sort of Western cultural tradition. Um, and maybe it's sometimes that it's, I mean, again, coming back to the Eastern tradition, there's never either or. You always have both, right? It's, stability, flexibility, inertia, flow, um, stability, change. Whereas sometimes we're a bit like, yeah, we either have one and we forget about the other. It's either or. We pick one and the other one is forgotten, and then we remember it, I don't know, 50 years later or 100 years later or 1,000 years later. Uh, Whereas in the Eastern tradition, it's always this eternal thing where you go between things in sort of a natural evolution, and it's both
Yeah.
and that's okay. Both exist, and it doesn't have to be a conflict. It's like a correlative pair. It's not a dichotomy. Well, both are important, and depending a bit on the context, one could be more suitable than the other.
Yeah. I had a thought listening to you, and I'm curious how that lands with you. But first, I have to open the door because once
Yeah.
we started talking, the sun came out,
Wow.
and now we're getting baked in this thing because before it had been raining. So, um, my favorite Zen story, I think it goes like this. There's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is you're falling through thin air. There's nothing to hold on to. The good news is there is no ground. And it looks to me like, everything being in flow requires us to have a really good handle on our fears, if not even, drop most of them. And given that, we get born, we get afraid of things, we're all afraid to die. The more deterministic philosophies, they allow us to create an illusion of control. So because by and large, as a population on this planet, I think we are more fear-driven than, being able to go with the flow and feel safe, feel held by life in that. Is it maybe because of that? That just, the more controlling philosophy got more popular?
Yeah. Of course, there are more controlling philosophies in the East as well as in the West. And again, people are different. Some are a bit more controlling and some are a bit less. And again, very contextual, very situational. Sometimes maybe you need to apply a little bit more control, and in some cases you can totally let go. And again, trying to get out of these false dichotomies and where you try to capture a bit too much. I mean, labeling things, this is good, this is bad, this is dangerous, this is easy. Because again, since the world is changing so much, those as soon as you start put label on things, you might confuse yourself and your surroundings. So that's another thing that I think is important when the world is very turbulent. You need to be very careful on labeling things, and you cannot really capture reality in words in writing. I mean, it's hard even to talk about things because, my agile is not your agile. So, but still, we're pretty good. We've learned how to communicate, but we need to be aware of some of the pitfalls with labeling things as good or bad or beautiful or ugly, whatever pairs you pick.
I mean, one thing I'm taking away from that is I quite consciously look for collaborators that are no longer driven by fears, right? Especially if it's unacknowledged, if it's not seen by themselves, because that tends to make things harder. It tends to create friction somewhere down the road. But that
And
has to be said.
how do you figure that out? I mean, how do you figure out if someone is driven by fear or is attracted by a vision?
It's a mix of things, right? Part is just gut feel
Hmm.
at this point. Another is testing, as you know, as I said, when we did that boat event in Paris,
Hmm.
part of the purpose was what happens if we do things under pressure? What happens if we do things quickly?
Hmm.
Um, but I think what you're pointing me towards is maybe that's a blind spot on me that I see that fear still as problem in the sense that there is clarity, they're seeing what it can do, and then there is bringing the love and the acceptance so that can change because just the clarity alone it's pushing, it doesn't help anybody, change, evolve, whatever you want to call it. um yeah, what do you make of that?
No, but as you just said, fear. What's the opposite of fear? Well, you could call it acceptance. You can probably think of other opposites. Um, and we all have a little bit of of everything in ourselves, and if we can be open to that and be open to that in others and think about complementarities. I mean, maybe if you have a team of people, someone should have a little bit of fear in them, because if none of the team members has fear, maybe you miss something. Because in real life, there is fear, and yeah,
Oh,
something like that.
mm. Yeah, I think both that fear bit and what you said earlier about words gets me to the question about creating shared language for what we're doing. Because I'm noticing time and again that we're doing things, we're following patterns, and they've repeated themselves over the past couple of years. Like they are beginning to look like real things, but we don't really have language for that. Um, did you ever come across Peter Koenig and Tom Nixon, their work on Source?
No, no, I didn't. Please enlighten me.
It's basically the idea that any project, any enterprise starts with a vision, and the person who first tunes into that and then takes a risk to make it happen becomes the source. And the function of source is to guard, to shepherd, to steward that vision, and they know because, right, they kind of birthed it into the world. They know this is part of it, this is inside the lines, and this is outside the lines.
Mhm.
It's not at all intended as an hierarchical thing. It's intended as function.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that it's the one single truth, but and obviously it goes deeper and broader than what I just shared. And I've applied that to past collaborations, to past startups, to seeing also, the dysfunctions that certain sources brought because they hadn't cleaned up their own past. And it is a really valid predictor for success or failure, at least in my limited data set.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so first question, is there anything in your work or your experience that would relate to? And then the second question, weaving it back to the language. One thing we're trying to figure out is how do we explain this to people, especially those who've just left the corporate world, who don't like the hierarchy anymore, and then they run into, well, there is a source and they have a function, and to them it lands like hierarchy.
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah, let's start with the first one. I think I like the idea of a source. That to me is like energizing. Um, you know, water from a spring. I mean, that's a source, right? Uh, but how do you capture that? that source? How does that function work? I guess I'm coming back to the second question. Language is hard. Labels are hard. Can you visualize it somehow? Can you draw something? What kind of metaphors, what kind of stories can you spin around this? Spin in a positive sense. I mean, spin in the sense of weaving. I think that's crucial. And some of the founders and entrepreneurs I've worked with over the years, they're extremely good at telling those stories and getting people to get
Yeah.
what they're after. So I totally share your experience there. Uh, and you need those people and you want those people, but then how do how do how do you make them realize or get them to understand that, hey, let's try to, it's not only about you. How do we get this self-playing piano idea? How can we, I mean, because sometimes they get so locked on target that they don't realize that there are other people who have great ideas, and how can you co-create things? How can we tune and tweak it a little bit, and get even more people on board? And when is the right time for that? Because again, it's about timing, because that's not something you do from day one. You need to let things grow a bit and get people on board, so you have a team of a certain size, and you're reasonably harmonized in that team. So where am I going with all this? I like the idea of a source and a function, resonates. Um, Words, I mean, visualize, stories, maps. I mean, uh, but again, it's also contextual, so you need to figure that out, what works in that team or that community or that startup. Because again, people are different, and a certain metaphor might not work at all, and a certain story falls totally flat. So it's it depends. It's a silly answer, right? Um, but I think at some point you need to get more people involved in even the co-creation of your source or your vision or your mission or whatever you call it, and be ready to tune and tweak it a bit together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, I mean, just for the record, the source as a key decisive function comes in edge cases, right? When you have looked at it all together, you have deliberated, you have brainstormed, and you still cannot get to consent. Then it's like that sensing of source also keeps the collaboration from getting bogged down, right?
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, and of course there are methods to get to consent. I mean, consensus. I mean, up north here, especially in Sweden, we're driven by consensus, and that takes a long time sometimes. And there are pros and cons with that, of course, because when you have consensus and it's true consensus, then things will happen very, very quickly. But you can also have this consent mechanism, where you put forward a proposal. Okay, now we're going to try this.
Yeah.
Um, And then people say, well, I'm willing to try. Let's try it for a month or a week or whatever. And people who are not ready to try, I mean, you want them to say that, and you want
Yeah.
to listen to them and hear their honest opinion, because their little fear or their little gut feel might be important. And well, you can use the thumbs if I'm ready to go, I'm indifferent, or well, I have a valid concern, and then you state your valid concern, and you expect your peers to listen to you, and then after, you can sort of iterate such a process, and I've seen that working. If you have people who have some kind of knowledge of each other and trust among themselves, then that could help you to get to a new iteration of your source or your mission or your purpose or your vision or whatever you call it. Uh, because when you do that exercise, that should be either regularly, um, if it's once a month or every quarter, I don't know, depends on the context, or that something has happened in your startup with customers or with the surroundings or competitors or whatnot. Uh, and I think it's important to, because that comes back to the diversity. You have more eyeballs, more brains, more hearts into it. Of course, the founder or co-founders, it's their baby, right? But you want more parents to the baby
Uh,
if possible.
uh,
It takes a village to raise a child, sort of. That's spirit.
uh, I think the red thread, like the core question that we're floating around, is what allows purpose to move from a concept, hey, we're going to build a self-playing piano, into a real collective shared pattern that gets executed. Right? I
Exactly.
mean, that's the flip side that I'd love you to speak to, especially in the regenerative space, right? We have so many lovely initiatives
Mm,
and so many beautiful people,
mm.
and they're talking in circles. And yes,
Yes, I think we've all experienced that in different settings. It could be your family, or it could be your local sports club, or your rock band. I mean, uh, sometimes how do you get from
that sounds like there's an
thinking and talking
interesting,
to action?
Eric, that sounds like there is an interesting personal story about your rock band there.
Well, it didn't happen, unfortunately. So we didn't even get to the action of playing together. So I saw my brother do it, but we didn't get to the phase where we could even play together. But again, I think involvement is key. If you have people involved, it's the IKEA effect. I mean, I'm a Swede, right? We all love our IKEA furniture. If you have built it, you feel emotionally attached to it. I built this, whatever, bookshelf or chair or table. So if you have co-created the purpose a bit, then it's easier to feel attached to it and make it happen. I think it's as simple and hard as that. And if you do that together on a whiteboard, or if you do this through consent-based decision-making process, I mean, there are different ways of doing it, but getting that involvement, which is easier if it's a smaller group, but there are ways to do it also with bigger groups. I think that's super important if you want to make it happen. That's my experience.
I mean, first of all, I'm really glad you just validated our entire fundraising strategy, right? Bring the investors in early, make them a part of the work, make it a co-creation, and never ask them for money. Like let them sell
Mm,
themselves.
mm,
Um, the second part that you said, how do you do it in a larger group, especially? Like it's fine with smaller groups. It's also easier to pick and choose than if it's already mature people, then all of
mhm.
this, goes naturally, quickly and easy. But we're not going to get to scale at that level.
Now, that's a good question, and a very interesting challenge. Hopefully, by having experienced this in a smaller group, the people who are in that group could then start groups and form groups. So it could be like rings on the water. I mean, you have people who have experienced it, they've felt it, they've sensed it, they've done it, and then they could lead by example, to take it to a new group. So I think that's one way of doing it that I've seen work.
Yeah, also happy about that one because I see it the same way. We just haven't proved it out at, a scale that matters yet. So, but you said that's one way you've seen work. Are there others?
I'm thinking if I've seen any other ways work. No, no, not really. I had, well, nothing that comes up like this. I think that's the one that I've seen work. I don't think I've seen anything else work so far.
We found the universal formula. But I mean, it makes sense, right? I came across this 20 years ago. I was planning my PhD on integral leadership development. And I wasn't really interested in the leadership development. I came from the MBA world, and supposedly we were trained as leaders, but in my first jobs, I quickly realized I did not have a clue about what that meant. And also, I was a communications professional early on, and in that space of professional communicators, intra-team, interpersonal communication was not good. And so I was like, hey, there's all this stuff that I've learned on my own personal development journey. Why don't they teach that to us at university? So, how do I bring it into corporates? I write my PhD, prove that human personal development is a profitable undertaking scientifically, and then, then they'll do it. Um, and I didn't know that all of this existed, but the first idea was change agents, right? Find people that already have the drive to even look in that direction, help them develop themselves, and then practice with others. Right? I know it's the quickest way to learn something, teach it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I'm actually curious if you'd agree with that statement.
Yeah, I think communities of practice is something that I've seen work well. Um, you try to set a few constraints and boundary conditions, but you want self-organization. For example, you can have a community of practice for managers, say,
Yeah.
because we have seen how managers have worked. This is the way we do things in this company. But we have ideas for another way for managers to work. Let's talk about that. Let's share that, and let's have people who are managers
Mm,
and people who have done a journey from, well, let's call it a traditional manager role to a more, call it empowering or using harmonizing autonomy. Um, have persons that you can talk to and have conversations in a small environment where you're all practitioners, and you're all on some kind of individual journeys, but you can talk to each other and ask questions. Okay, what have you seen? What worked for you? What did you do in the old world and in the new world? So those kind of communities of practice I've seen being highly valuable and
yeah,
helpful.
yeah. This is maybe a little bit of a left turn, but again, in this transformative space, in this world-changing space, how do you distinguish actual transformation, real transformation from performative change?
What do you mean by performative change?
Like the all the greenwashing comes to mind, obviously,
Ah,
as we're performing green, we're performing, but that goes especially for integrity, right? I'm performing integrity versus actually having both the blood and the sweat and the tears and the vulnerability in it.
mhm,
Um, it goes, if you go into the leadership development, personal development side, there is so many teacher, guru, authority figures out there that are performing love or are performing presence, but something about it smells hollow, right? And I've always been wondering if there's a way to put more validity underneath those things, then yeah, this smells somehow off.
mm, mm. No, I see what you're saying, and yeah, I've seen it, of course, and the you know transformations in ways of working in large companies, and you just relabel things to make it look the new ways, but underneath, if you just scratch the surface, it's basically the same. So that's why I say it takes time, because yeah, having things like communities of practice, having people that you can see in action doing the things, not only talking about it. So one of my I mean, the leaders and managers I learned the most from was, I mean, he was saying, well, let's do what it takes.
Mhm.
If 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 I need to wash the dishes or clean up after the office party, I will do that if that's what it takes. And he did. It wasn't just talk.
Yeah.
So he was really, doing the dishes and cleaning up after the office party. And I think you need to see it in action. Then I've seen other fantastic leaders, total entrepreneurs, who could, paint this vision of everyone will have broadband in Sweden. We will have, 10 megabit when everyone was having 10 kilobits per second. And make people want to be in that new brave world. Uh, but who was totally uninterested in whatever business,
Yeah. Yeah.
making money out of it. No, no, that was not the important. It was the vision and creating a new space. So I kind of like the leadership actions that resonate with me is not only the talk. I mean, you need to see the action. You need to see people do it. Um, that's the hard and that simple answer.
I mean, it gets interesting on the hard days, right? That
Mhm.
to me is one of the key questions. How do people do on the days that they break, and how do they show up then? And I'm gonna share this just assuming that this video doesn't go viral because then my partner Victor would be very angry at me. So he was the first person that I met on this village building journey where it's like, okay, yeah, there's both the vision and the grounding. So we've done a lot of things together since. And Victor's collaboration, early collaboration litmus test is when people come to his house and, there's food, who does the dishes unbidden? Like who just goes into the kitchen, no questions asked, does the dishes. And it's very true. It is a very good indicator.
Mhm. It is, and I was sailing with some friends back in the 90s or early 2000s, I don't remember. And you know, when you sail, there are certain things that you need to do, and one is preparing the food and clearing up after the food. And we said, let's self-organize this. Can we do that? And we were all somehow budding leaders, and we had various manager roles and positions. And the easy thing would have be to do, let's have someone do the schedule for us for the full week or the 2 weeks or whatever it was. No, let's self-organize this. Let's see, can we do that? We're grown-ups. We could do this, and we could because we wanted it to be a vacation, right? We didn't want to have schedules and boring stuff, but we still wanted to have food and we wanted to have a clean environment. So that was an interesting experiment, and it worked out really well.
Yeah. And there the question becomes how much can this really scale as culture? Like Victor's second law of the kitchen is you can tell the quality by a community of how the kitchen looks after the party, right? If the
Hmm.
kitchen is spotless before everybody left, good
Hmm.
community. If
Hmm.
everybody's leaving the work for somebody else, probably not so. Um, and I mean, I get how up to a certain point you can see that culture and you can live it and you set a standard and people learn to just look for what needs to be done. Um, how much of that do you think is a developmental thing? Because I think the less busy we are with ourselves, the less fear-driven we are, the more it becomes natural to look at what needs doing, how can I serve? How much of that is a culture thing? And I guess the key question that leads to is how do we build cultures where people grow and evolve naturally in that direction without too much friction, but also without too much pain, right?
Hmm.
Because that's another thing that I shared previously. What I'd like us to get to here with this systemic leadership inquiry is most, if not all of us, have simply learned by pain. And there is a tipping point at which it turns into being more drawn by joy, by coherence, by something positive, whatever you want to call it. Um, But it must be possible to make that a little bit easier for people. Not take out the pain, that's a fact of life, but
Mm,
take out the suffering, take out some of the loops.
mm. Yeah, and again, I think it's not either or. I mean, we learn a bit from pain and we learn a bit from positive feedback loops as well. I think in certain countries or cultures or families, it's more of a negative feedback loop, and in others, there's more positive. But there's this famous footballer, a lady in Sweden. She was a fantastic player. She won, European championships, and she turned into a really successful coach on the national team level. She's won Olympic gold medals and whatnot as a coach. Her name is Pia Sundhage. She's a true inspiration, and her philosophy is like, use your best foot. I mean, play to your best foot. Use your best abilities. You don't need to be beat up yourself because your left foot is not as good as your right foot. It's a team effort, Use your best foot and play to your strengths. And that's was a big shift in general in Swedish society. Have someone say that, and let's focus on the positives. Uh, so I think that's important to remember. I mean, put the spotlight on people who do good things. I mean, if it's the CEO who does the dishes, well, let's talk about that. It's not only PowerPoints. Well, the CEO was doing the dishes because that's what it took, and someone who did something really good that was in line with what we're going to do. Let's put the spotlight on that. Let's spread the word. I think we can do a lot more of that, which is of course easy to say and harder to do, and also practice. I mean, maybe we can do a little bit more practice in business. I mean, if you do sports or music, you practice a lot and then you play. Whereas in business, we play all the time. We don't practice. We don't reflect. I'm exaggerating a bit, but we could do a little bit more of reflection and practice, and communities of practice where you share stories and
Yeah.
both of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I wish it was that easy, but you know, maybe it is. As far as I'm concerned, we're practicing all the time. I mean, we're either winning or we're practicing, one
Hmm.
or the other. In the
Mm.
sense that if it didn't work out, we were practicing, and if we won, then yeah, sure, we were playing.
Oh, yeah. But that's a nice way of framing it. Actually, that's really cool. I love it.
Yeah. The I'm gonna jump maybe 3 or 4 steps to the side, but you brought this up in my mind. So one of the big leverage points for our type of work is making social and ecological value into hard assets, right? Hard auditable, tradable assets. And part of that is going to be measuring things like the CEO doing the dishes. But the tricky bit is, to me, there is this quantum physics observational principle there, right?
Mm. Mm.
If dishwashing gets performed and observed for social credit, it stops being the true thing. It gets
Mm.
performative.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, as soon as you start measuring things, then you can go horribly wrong if you don't think about it very, very carefully. Um, yeah, and again, you want targets, you want things to be measurable uh, to some degree. Um, and the thing I've seen there is if you can find a balanced set of measures that keep things reasonably harmonized, so you don't sub-optimize for one thing. Let's take a concrete example from my past life. Um, we had big problems with quality of a product that I was working on, and we could have put a target. Let's have the number of trouble tickets at this number, but that could lead to that we forgot about other things like, are people engaged and motivated? Do we deliver things reasonably on time? Do we deliver things reasonably um, cost efficient? So we set up a measurement system where we looked at both quality and some kind of time and some kind of cost and people being engaged, happy, motivated. So when you start to measure things, think about not measuring only one thing, measure, counterpoints or several things so that you don't sub-optimize yourself out of business or out of planet.
Yeah. Is there anything either in the ancient books or in the modern practice that addresses the following key problem? Like the way things are looking, a lot of things is going to get automated. A lot of things are going to get decided by AI, and whatever cannot be quantified, whatever cannot be codified in a way that gets understood by AI is probably going to get priced out of the equation little by little, right? So on the one hand, we need to figure out how to make those sacred, uniquely human things measurable, understandable at the very least. And on the other side, like the day that me caring for my parents gets turned into an asset, it just stops being the same thing.
Yeah, how do you measure love? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't. And this is really, really tricky. And if you look at different companies, I'm thinking of Toyota and Tesla. Uh, Toyota, they consciously don't automate certain things that they could automate because as soon as you automate them, it's like a dead end. You cannot improve or do more. It's been automated. Then you automated the human judgment out of the equation. So Tesla, they automated a lot in their factories. But guess what? They learned new things and then they couldn't improve further because they had automated it and it was really hard. They were like stuck in 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 the automated solutions, and that could be software or it could be hardware. So I think for important things you really need to have a human in the loop, and I'm really concerned with AI because it's a black box. You cannot, with the current technology, see truly where the answers come from. That's really tricky. So for important things, you need to have a human in the loop to check things. Oh, I love the tools. I mean, it's really great. You can get a lot of help. But there are certain things that I would never let an AI tool help out with.
Yeah. Just going back to the core leadership thing. Okay, this may be a mean question, but it's what's coming up right now. What the hell does this leadership even mean in this emergent systemic space that we're looking at?
Mm. It's another kind of leadership where you're more of a gardener or facilitator. You help out in co-creating things like the purpose and the constraints. Um, so it's important that you get people together and leverage the perspectives that are in the group in a more valuable way. And then you need to have, you know, the ability to create trust in a group and have the attitude of, well, let's create the self-playing piano. Let's start by needs. What are your needs? What are our customers' needs? Uh, and think a bit more systemically. Think about how things fit together. And you as an individual can never see the complete picture. Maybe your team with all those diverse perspectives cannot see the complete picture, but it's easier if you're more than one to see you have the metaphor with the elephant and someone sees the trunk, someone sees the leg and so on and so forth. I mean, if you have more people working with whatever challenge you're trying to solve or do something about, then it will be easier. So more facilitative, um, helping out creating the conditions for this self-organization. And this goes back to Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching, or as I call it, the art of leadership. So it is more about facilitation than conducting, say.
Uh,
And
Another,
realizing that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be the Superman or Superwoman or Supergirl or whatever metaphor you use. You can have a league of legends,
uh,
or a team of people with different superpowers,
yeah.
different best foots playing together, sort of.
I mean that, and even what I think we've consciously been saying to each other for at least 2 years now is that being comfortable in not knowing is one of the key skills in this. Because a lot of the time we don't know.
Mm,
And then if you do it the traditional way, and let fear and pressure and whatever push you, then it's like, no, we must do something, we
mm,
must. And that is usually when bad decisions get taken.
mm.
Opposed to saying, no, if we're going to sit still for a week, for 2 weeks, we will know when we know, but we're not going to move before there's clarity.
Yeah, and if you have the sort of attitude that we can learn together, we can figure it out. That's a pretty helpful attitude,
Uh,
also.
uh, I got another potentially mean one. Trust. Like the all right, so I have to share a story around this. Alanya, the previous interview conversation I had, we've known each other for a while. And she's my wise old witch. She knows I call her that, and she's one of the people I trust to, call out my bullshit. Um, and so I was asking, like, what's my current edge? And she's like, you have to fall in love with everybody now. And I was like, I've created this nice space with people I know that I trust that work the same way. And she's like, no, 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 you don't get to do this from the back. You have to do it from the front. And for that, people must trust you. And for that, you have to fall in love with everybody, even the people who annoy you. And I love the story she shared around trust, right? If somebody has a plant and it's been in their family for 300 years, would they, of any person in the room, would they pick you to take care of that plant when they go on vacation? And it's like, on the one hand, trust seems so obvious, right? We feel it when it's there, and when it isn't, it's also very obvious. But I actually have no idea what it is.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I think about a couple of things come to mind. I mean, if you think of going back to integrity, I mean, walking straight, following your heart and mind. If you start by assuming that the person you're talking about has integrity, then you start to, maybe that's trusting. Assume positive intent. Assume that that person has integrity, uh, until proven otherwise. I mean, you can't be blindly stupid, right? But if you start by trusting, that could create this mirror neuron effect, or whatever it's called. I mean, you start by trusting, and then you get the trust. And I think that goes back to Lao Tzu as well. I mean, people who are trustworthy, you trust, and people who are not trustworthy, you also trust, because you don't really know initially, and it could be your label.
Yeah.
So it's really hard, right? But start by assuming positive intent until proven otherwise, because otherwise you send mixed signals. I mean, this thing about trust but verify, or trust and verify, that's like, if you start with that framing or that attitude, I think people will sense that, and then they will not trust you because they feel that, oh, he's sending mixed messages here.
I agree. Definitely, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. And I don't want to live in a different world, right? If I assume malicious intent, then no, that's not going to be any fun at all. The thing is, where I'm personally standing is I find it hard to trust people that don't know themselves, that don't know their edge, that don't know their fear, because if they're not conscious of that, then I can like them as person, as a,
Mm,
love them as a person. But
mm,
as far as collaborations is concerned, I've seen this too many times. If they don't know what triggers them,
mm,
then they do things at the wrong time
mm.
and everybody gets surprised. And that like trust to me, the interpersonal trust, um, I don't think that can get broken, right? Everybody is human. We all do the best we can given what looks real to us moment to moment. And so that's just what that is. But there is in building these things, there is a guardianship function. There's a responsibility, not just to the thing that we are building, but also to everybody else. And I haven't really found an answer to that one. Um,
No, and also people are different, right? Some of the people I trust, they work in another way. You need to build the trust with them before they trust you. And that's another way, a totally different approach, and that we can discuss where that comes from. Is it from your family, your upbringing, or your society that you work? I mean, we talk about the Nordic countries. They're
yeah.
generally saying that it's high trust because we had to trust each other, otherwise we would have died because it's cold and it's snow and small villages. Everyone had to help each other out, and then of course there were other rules. As soon as you broke the trust, you were an outcast, a total outcast. So, I mean, there's no simple answer here. And yeah, being mindful of the differences, I think it's a good starting point. And then starting, I think for me, works assuming positive intent and assuming that there's integrity.
Mm. I think this may be another area where we need more words, right? I can trust that the person is going to be in integrity, that they're going to do the best they can, that
Mm. Yeah, and these are weasel words, right? What is trust? I mean, you have
exactly.
your definition, I have my definition.
Mm,
Integrity, those are very, very big words and can mean a
nothing.
lot of things and nothing. And then the actions that come out of the words.
So how you do it, how do you do it in practice? Like the moving at the speed of trust, you observe over
Yeah,
time.
I think you need to observe the actions and see that it's coherent with with the words.
In in the whole leadership development arc, I think what we're talking about now is, alignment between heart and mind, strategy, sword, love. Um, are there any practices that you've seen work consistently for people to grow into that, to develop that?
I think one thing that I realized if I look back 20, 25 years in various leadership training sessions and capability development, the the insight that it's not only about the individuals, it's about the interaction and how do we visualize those interactions? How do we visualize whatever system we're in? That's not something that you normally practice in those leadership. I mean, the standard leadership training sessions that are there. So I think that's something which is missing. More of practice in how to visualize the system, and because that's a prerequisite for whatever retuning and retweaking or even building a self-playing piano. it's not only about the leader and the followers, or it's about the interactions. And how do you visualize those interactions, and what is really going on here? What boundaries do we have? So more systemic, holistic visualization of what we're doing. I think that's one insight for me, at least, over the years.
What I'm hearing in that is basically show me how I'm part of the system, show me how I'm interdependent, how I'm making the whole function just by virtue of this thing that I'm bringing, and realizing the interdependence from that.
Totally. And also, in the next step, draw something together. I mean, where do we want this to evolve? How do we want this to evolve? What do we want? What do we need? And how can we draw that on a whiteboard, on a flip chart? Or I think that's something we, including myself, can practice more.
Yeah, yeah, I've noticed that. Again, giving credit to Victor, right? We traditionally start every collaboration with a why, what, how, who for, etc. workshop with
Mm,
the whiteboards.
mm,
And every time I skip that thing because we just want to start running,
yeah.
tends to bite me.
And I think going beyond that, even because then you have words, right? And if you can turn those words into some images, then it's even, I mean, can you visualize it in some, complement the words with visuals? I think that's beautiful and powerful.
Do you actually mean art? Do you mean diagrams? Do you
Uh,
mean
Any any of those. I mean, I was fortunate enough, in one leadership team that I was a member. We had one person who was really a fantastic artist, and we could leverage on that. But in other teams, we were more stick figure people, but we could still make diagrams. We could draw our arrows and try to, get a better sense of how things were interconnected. Um, so
yeah, like this map making, right? Making a shared map of
exactly, and that's one of those wonderful things that Simon Wardley brought to the world of strategy, getting the evolution of technology and business, and drawing a map together, a Wardley map. Then you can start making more strategic choices based on that, because it's not about you versus me and my story versus your story. We build this map together, just like you can build an IKEA furniture together, or a Lego figure together. Then it's about improving the object, not about my story versus your story. Let's co-create this object, in that sense, in that case, a map of, that helps us make better strategic choices.
our story.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, Karsten.
The I know we're already 2 minutes past time, but is there anything else you'd like to add to close this with?
I think the time was flying. This was amazing. It was like, fresh water, coming on a Friday afternoon. I loved it. Amazing. Um, no, but I think we want to succeed sustainably, right? These are turbulent times. Getting getting more perspectives, that will help, because as an individual you can't see everything. You need collaboration. You need a team. So it's it's collaboration, even if it's change, or if it's leadership, if it's strategy. The co-creation is crucial. That's my experience, and that's the pattern over thousands of years, because we're still human.
It's the one thing we got. Thank you so much.
Thank you.